Hi, I'm going to tell you our messy story using all this lot to illustrate it for you. Watch what I do. You might be able to recreate this scene yourself. It's all about a man called Paul, his mate Silas, and how they ended up in prison, and then what happened next. The trick to telling this story lies in a towel, for reasons that will become obvious later. So now that I've laid my towel down flat, I'm going to build a building on top of it. I don't actually think they had dinosaurs in Paul's day, but it doesn't matter, the books are still useful. I'm trying to build a building that looks a bit like a prison, because Paul and Silas were in trouble and they were in prison. Paul was a friend of Jesus, and he was the kind of friend that you'd have liked to have on your side, because he didn't mind what he said and he'd say it. Jesus had risen from the dead and returned to heaven, but Paul wanted everyone to know about Jesus, and he didn't mind telling people, even when sometimes people didn't really want to hear. And he travelled around. He travelled all around the kind of place that you go on your holidays, around Greece and Turkey, Italy, telling people about Jesus. And sometimes people were really pleased to hear, and other times they weren't. So this is a story about what happened in a place called Philippi when Paul told people about Jesus and they weren't too happy about it. Paul had ended up being stuck in prison. Yeah, he'd even been arrested for it. And he was with his friend Silas. And so the pair of them had ended up in prison in Philippi. Now, you might think that being in prison would really get somebody down. But Paul was an encouraging kind of a bloke. In other words, he liked to really remember how fortunate he was. He wanted to remember how much he loved God, and he wanted to remember and to remind everybody else how much he trusted that God would look after him. And so Paul and Silas, in the middle of the night, in this manky, horrible prison in Philippi, were singing hymns to God. They were singing, and everyone could hear them. All the other prisoners could hear them, and the jailer could hear them. Then, right in the middle of the night, while Paul and Silas were singing hymns to God, the most amazing thing happened. The prison guard had just done his rounds and he'd made sure that the prisoners were safely locked in their cells, when suddenly there was a terrible noise, and then everything started shaking. And then the whole prison fell down. Oh no! Where are all the prisoners? No, I'm going to be in so much trouble. The prison guard was absolutely frantic. What was he going to do? The prisoners would have escaped. Don't worry, said Paul and Silas. We're here. We haven't run away. The prison guard was absolutely amazed. I can't believe you didn't run away when you could, he said. But Jesus didn't run away when he was arrested, said Paul and Silas, and neither will we. Tell me more about this Jesus, said the prison guard. I'd like to know about him. And so there, in the ruins of the Philippian prison, Paul and Silas told the prison officer the good news about how much God loved him and how Jesus had come to save him. So Paul and Silas were set free from prison. But Paul was the kind of guy who always ended up back in trouble. He just couldn't stop telling people about Jesus. And he was never saved by an earthquake again. But even when he was in prison, he never stopped encouraging people. He used to write letters telling people how much God loved them when he couldn't go and see them himself. And he was always encouraging people to be their very best for God. I wonder what it's like to be in an earthquake. I think it's probably really scary because it's noisy and the ground shakes and the buildings can fall down. Now, I'm going to build myself another building and make myself another earthquake. You can do this too. If we'd been down at church for Messy Church, I wanted to do this with great big boxes on the floor with a big sheet underneath, and we could have made a huge building and made it fall down. But because it's still Messy Church at home, you're going to have to do this yourself with whatever you've got. Now, it's already a bit noisy here today because we've got a thunderstorm outside, and some people find thunderstorms a bit scary. So imagine what it must be like when there's an earthquake. Anyway, I'm building myself a tower. I've got books, I've got a bit of Lego, but I've not stuck it together properly, and I've been using Jenga blocks and boxes of games, and basically you can use anything you've got. Just find empty boxes, do it big, build a tower on the floor maybe. But the important thing is, before you do it, is to put something down underneath, like a towel or a big sheet of newspaper, and build your tower on that. And then we'll see what happens. So for earthquakes we need some noise. I've got the box off the dominoes to shake. We've got thunder outside. I don't know if you can hear that. But you could get a plastic milk bottle and you could fill it with little stones from outside and give that a really good shake. That would make a good noise. This is going to be noisy. It's going to be noisy, and this is going to fall down. Because when you have an earthquake, there's a rumbling and a shaking and a noise, and the ground begins to shake and everything falls down. And if you want to do that again, you can. Build your tower as big as you like and then make it fall down in an earthquake. But just imagine what it must have been like to be Paul and what it must have been like to be Silas, stuck in the middle of the earthquake, and what it must have felt like to be the prison guard who thought he was going to be in big trouble because the prisoners might have escaped. So I'm really sorry that we're not meeting at St Andrew's for Messy Church, and we're really hoping and praying that we'll be able to do that in the autumn sometime. And I hope you'll come, because it's not the same without you. But in the meantime, you've got a Messy Church bag with all sorts of stuff in it. So what have we got? Well, we've got a story roll which tells you all about the story of Paul and Silas in prison, which you can read and colour in for yourself. We've got some little pieces of paper torn into strips. Don't know if you can see. Long pieces of paper. Wonder what we might do with those. Well, you'll need your glue stick, and you've got one of those in your bag. And these are for making paper chains. And what you do to make a paper chain is you put some glue, on the end of the piece of paper and make a loop. And then you get your next piece of paper And before you make a loop out of that one, you thread it through the loop you've made out of this one. Can you see how I've managed to join those two pieces of paper together to make a chain? And we can carry on with our pieces of paper and make a long chain. So these are for making paper chains. And while you're making paper chains, remember Paul and Silas in chains in prison. And maybe while you're making your paper chains, you could think about people in prison and say a prayer for them too. As I said in the story, Paul ended up in prison again after his time in Philippi. But even when he was in prison, he wrote letters and sent cards to his friends all around the world to tell them how much Jesus loved them. So we've got in here some things that will help you to make a card to send to somebody else and encourage them. Inside it says something from Paul's letter to the church at Philippi. He said, you've got to shine like stars lighting up the sky. So I want you to make a card that says, you shine like a star in my life. And you can decorate the front of it. There's some things here to help you, and give it to somebody and encourage them. And of course, while we're thinking about stars, we've got star stickers and star magnets and things to make as well. And there's even a star pencil in with your card making equipment. So Paul told his friends to shine like stars in the universe. And you know, the great thing is that we are made of stardust. Did you know that? We're made of the same chemical elements that stars are made of. So, got a little person, and we've got a piece of paper here which lists all the chemical elements that we're made of. Now, the trick is, on your little person, is to write down in each of the little boxes on here the chemical symbols of all those elements, one after another, and just think about it, that we're made of the same stuff that stars are made of. And then you can colour in and decorate, maybe even use some of your sticky stars on your person. And remember that you are made of stardust, but you are special because you're made in God's image as well, and you have God's fingerprints upon you. Another thing you'll find in your envelope is a little tiny envelope with some pennies in. Not very clean pennies. Do you like shiny pennies? I like shiny pennies. So why don't you have a look around your house and see if you can find something to make your pennies shine. You could use polish or soap or toothpaste. The best thing I've found is tomato ketchup. You try it, see if you can make your pennies shine. God loves to see us shine. But you know, even when we're grubby, we're still valuable to him. We don't send many letters these days, really, do we? It's all texts and emails and messaging on WhatsApp and Facebook. But you know, I like getting a letter. I like getting postcards. I like getting cards on my birthday. And Paul, as I said before, wrote lots of letters, and it's nice to send cards to people. When we pray, it's a bit like sending cards and letters to God, sending him messages, and you know, he loves to hear from us. So we've got the makings of a post box in our bags. A piece of card that we're going to roll around and stick together like that, and then put the little paper hat on it. Hopefully you should end up with something that looks a little bit like this. And then you can write your own letters to God and post them. If you wanted to make it a bit stronger, you could always put a jam jar underneath to catch your letters. There's a couple of other goodies in your messy church bags as well. I couldn't send them out without some Haribo star mix, since we've been talking about stars. Just remember, whatever prison you might find yourself in, do what Paul and Silas did. Focus on God. Who knows, he might send a miracle to save you. And whatever you do, try to encourage other people, like Paul did, even when he was in prison and when he was stuck in prison and couldn't get out. he still sent cards and letters to people to encourage them. And don't forget to send your own messages to God as well. He does love to hear from you. I'd love to hear from you too. If you've done any really good pictures of crafts and want to put them on our Facebook page, then that would be brilliant. Just look at the Messy Church St Andrews Facebook page and stick those photographs on there. That would really encourage me. Hope to see you all soon.